One of the most important parts of the G20 is the European Union, representing 27 nations. The first interview of the EU ambassador to India, Ambassador Ugo Astuto, is to us to India today. Thank you so much for joining us here on the G20, sir. How do you look at India's presidency all through the year, and what do you think the deliverables are going to be?
Thank you. Well, I think the Indian president has done terrific work by putting on the table very topical issues of interest, of general interest for the international community. I could mention some. The fight against climate change, the digital transition, the use of digital solution for the provision of public services. Very important issue for the whole world. The achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Secretary General clearly said that we risk not respecting our calendar, so we need to focus. And more generally, issues which are relevant for the developing world, for the global south. And that's why also the particular attention on Africa is so important, and why we welcome the enlargement of the G20 to the African Union. So quite a number of topical issues, all of them extremely relevant for the international community, and we are very happy to support the Indian presidency in that.
But the challenges have been many, Ambassador, sir. Since the Bali summit, where we saw consensus, a document come through, for India and India's presidency, there have been 19 ministerials, not a single joint communique or an outcome document with consensus. The Russia-Ukraine war is certainly an aspect, but also China. There are impediments and challenges. What's your reading on the challenges that India has had to face?
Well, unfortunately, we are living through a very erratic moment in international relations. We are not in a business as usual environment. We have a Russian aggression ongoing in Europe, a Russian aggression against Ukraine, which is continuing, causing unspeakable loss of lives and damage, having a clear effect on food prices and energy prices. And let me underscore this. This is the result of a deliberate Russian policy. So all this clearly makes the circumstances very difficult for the Indian presidency. What is happening with this aggression is relevant for the G20. Issues such as the increase in food prices, the risk of food shortages in Africa, for instance. That's a very relevant issue also for the G20. So we cannot simply ignore the fact that we are living through a very particular moment in history. And unfortunately, the Indian presidency has to cope with that. These issues affect also the G20.
Are you hopeful of a joint communique in all the negotiations that the European Union also sits through? There is no consensus when it comes to war, whether it is Russia or China. They have been objecting to it. Do you see somewhere over here when the Sherpa meeting gets over and the summit takes place that there could be a consensus?
I think I will leave it to the Sherpas.
Okay. Food and energy crisis you spoke of, but elaborate to us, what could the G20 really do in ensuring security in the realm of food and energy when the world is grappling with the worst crisis ever?
Well, I think it's important we look at the causes of the rise in food prices. And as I said earlier, this is the outcome of a deliberate Russian policy. We have seen now also Russia withdrawing from the Black Sea grain agreement. We see Russia bombing the Ukrainian ports and storage facilities. So there is a very deliberate action directing at making the steady supply of grains from Ukraine impossible. This affects a large number of nations, particularly poor nations, particularly in Africa. That's why, as the European Union, we believe that the international community needs to come together and make it clear to the Russian leadership that it's not acceptable to resort to this sort of tactics. that we need to resume the Black Sea grain agreement. In the meantime, as European Union, we have been trying to help those most in need. We have set up the solidarity lanes, which means alternative routes for Ukrainian grain. And for the past couple of years, we have been increasing our aid, particularly to African countries, to face the scarcity of grain and the food crisis.
How do you see climate change? You've said that climate change is an important aspect. India's presidency focused on it. But again, when it comes to the climate change ministerials, the climate ministerials, there was no consensus. There was differences of opinion on global south versus the west, on how are you going to deliver climate change. In that, where do you see the voice of the global south when it comes to climate change and their needs and their wants?
Well, look, I think I refer here to the repeated calls of the UN Secretary General for the international community to come together. He said that climate change is an existential crisis for the whole of humanity. And that's very true. We are facing a situation where we are not going to respect the upper limit we set of an increase in global warming of 1.5 degrees. We risk assisting to a much higher level of warming in the coming years. And in the meantime, what we see already this season, we have seen an increase in extreme weather events all over the world. Nobody is excepted, be it Europe, Asia, everywhere. So I think the need is there for all of us to come together, to inject a sense of urgency also in our conversation, to increase the ambition of our reduction in emissions, and in parallel to address the needs of those countries that do not have enough finance available to implement the transition towards a greener energy mix. I think as European Union we have shown our commitment. We are the first provider of development aid globally and of climate finance. So we walk the talk. The role played by India is also very important. So we appreciate the initiative of the Prime Minister, the LIFE initiative. It's also important when it comes to individual behaviors. And what India has been doing in investing substantially on solar is very important, clearly. What India does in terms of reducing emissions is of fantastic importance for the rest of the world. So I think the European Union and India can and do work together to shape the global agenda towards a greener future.
Finally, what are the hurdles and the deliverables that you're looking at the G20?
Well, look, I'm afraid I cannot preempt the summit itself and the work of the Sherpas. So what I can say at this stage is that the European Union is a strong supporter of the Indian presidencies of its priorities. So we'll do our utmost to work towards a productive conclusion.
And before I let you go, Ambassador, your delegation is due to visit. Any expectations from the EU-India relations?
Well, I think we are going through a particularly happy moment in EU-India relations. The past few years, we have seen great strides. We have seen the decision to resume the negotiation on the free trade agreement. We have seen the visit of the President of the Commission in 2022. And we have seen the setting up of the Trade and Technology Council, an extremely important tool that brings together ministers from the Indian government and two vice presidents of the European Commission to discuss issues such as the security of supply chain or green technologies. So issues which are particularly important for the future India, the European Union, and I think main countries of all. So I think we are at a moment where we are really achieving target set in terms of cooperation and collaboration.
On that note, Ambassador Ugo Astuto, many thanks for joining us here on India Today.
Thank you for inviting.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.